Warcry has a problem, and that main problem is a lack of a really compelling all-in-one starter set experience where you can just go and you can buy a box and you are ready to go. Unfortunately, all of those old boxes that I would recommend to people to go out and buy, so things like Heart of Gur, Sundered Fate, all of these boxes with a bit of terrain in them, with a couple of warbands, they're no longer produced by Games Workshop. They were only limited time things. They then went on to release those warbands separately, but in terms of the actual terrain in the box itself, they stopped to produce them. One of the biggest questions that we have is, if I'm a new player, how am I going to get into Warcry? What are my avenues into the game physically for the models? And what are the best ways for me to do that? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about the different avenues and the different routes that you have to get into the game properly. I'm going to be talking about a whole bunch of the different kinds of box sets that you can build, things that are produced by Games Workshop that will enable you to have a decent enough Warcry experience and serve to give a good introduction for you for the game. Okay, everybody, we did it. We absolutely smashed it last year. We hit that 3,000 subscriber goal. Let's do it again this year. We're going for 5K. All you need to do is like and subscribe. And in fact, no, you don't need to subscribe. What I would like you to do now, after you finish watching this video, I've got a massive playlist of all sorts of things Warcry. Check out one of those videos and see if that's what you like. But if you want to throw some more support my way, you can join me here as a member. You can join me over on Patreon. You can join my Discord. Links for that are going to be down in the description below. Either way, you get to see stuff before it's released. You get to have a say into the kind of content that I create in the future. That's it from me for now. Let's get back to the video. Now, something that I do want to talk about beforehand is that, technically speaking, you can play Warcry with most, if not all, troop-sized Age of Sigmar miniatures. That doesn't mean to say that going out there and just buying, for example, a box of Vindictors is going to give you a true representation and a good understanding and idea of how it is to play Warcry, the different rules and the different tactics that you'll be able to use. So whilst technically it is possible to start with any of these single boxes, it's not something that I would necessarily advise to people or rely on when I'm teaching people how to play and giving them advice into the kind of things that you could buy. As a general rule of thumb, I'm going to try and keep the cost as far down as possible. I'm going to try and make it so that whatever I'm recommending to you will give a decent Warcry experience, will give a little bit of flavor into the kinds of factions and warbands we're looking at, and really serve as a decent stepping on point for the hobby, an idea of what it is to play Warcry and how to play Warcry as possible. I have talked about many of these topics before in individual videos, so what I'm going to do whenever I speak about something, maybe it's about spearheads or it's about starter sets, I'm going to put the link up there and you'll be able to go and see those videos for each of those different avenues into the game. You'll be able to see a little bit more in depth and in a lot more detail as to the different kinds of lists that you can build and different recommendations that I may have for those specific products. Okay, so to start off with, we are going to talk about the rules. The rules of Warcry are extremely simple. They can be found on Warhammer Community. The way that I would advise people to start going about this is check out the rules on Warhammer Community, download the FAQ and the errata also on Warhammer Community, and then once you've digested all of that, go over to Warcry, and Warcry will have all of the rules for all of your models. It has a rules directory, it's got list building, it basically has everything you need. The reason why I'm suggesting that you go and download the rules from Warhammer Community first, along with the FAQ and errata, is that for me personally, I think that they are easier to digest in that form, and then once you know what you're looking for, then you can use Warcry for your reference, and you basically don't need to use those downloadable rules again. Similarly with the FAQs, I find that if they're all in one place, it's far easier to be able to look at and to be able to remember, okay, I've got things for this faction or that faction, or there was an update for this rule, then having the updates for the rule on Warcry that you then have to go look up yourself. So that's why I recommend that, but ultimately you're going to be using Warcry for all of your rules, for all of your list building, for basically everything. We can't talk about starting Warcry and how to get in there without talking about the Crypt of Blood starter set. Crypt of Blood basically has a couple of half-size warbands. It's got some very sparse terrain. You do get the board, you get the token set, which is nice, and then you get a couple of books. You get the Crypt of Blood starter book, which has a bunch of missions that kind of they're hand-holdy missions that take you through the different steps of the game, and each mission will take you through a different aspect of the game that you might want to go through. You get all of the cards for those warbands, you get all of the abilities, you get a bunch of dice as well. Whether Crypt of Blood is or is not for you is basically up for you to decide. A lot of existing players do not like Crypt of Blood because it brought nothing new to the game. The warbands that it contained you could basically get elsewhere. Those are mainly Warhammer Underworlds miniatures. There isn't really enough terrain for you to use, and you don't get a full rulebook or a full rules reference in there. I think calling Crypt of Blood a Warcry Starter Set in the strictest sense of the word, so like the Kill Team Starter Set, for example, I think that's a mistake. I think this is more a very light touch, hand-holdy way, more of a board game kind of product than an actual way into Warcry itself. So if you look at it from that point of view and you like the look of the Crimson Court and Xandar's Truth Seekers, then yeah, it might be something for you. Crypt of Blood itself retails at about £67.50, and for that price point, you can get better things in order to start your Warcry journey than this set. So really, it's up to you if you want to pick it up. Just bear in mind that you will 100% have to bulk out Crypt of Blood, the miniatures, and the warbands itself with other models in order for you to run a full Warcry warband. The second way that you can get in is just by buying one of the Warcry warband boxes. There are several to choose from. I've got the Questor Soulsworn that I'm showing off here. Each one gives a unique playstyle and a different way to play. Some are better than others. What they do have is self-contained warbands. You get all of the stats and all of the cards for your warbands in there. Sometimes you get a few different build options for those warbands, and it's by far the quickest and easiest way to get a all-in-one box solution if you just really wanted to start the game. Now, it is worth mentioning that some of them, I have said already, that they're not as good as others. There's a bit of a disparate power level between some of the best warbands and some of the worst bespoke warbands, so that's something that you might want to bear in mind when you go out and buy them. Ultimately though, when you are looking at a Warcry warband, either it's through these bespoke boxes or any other thing through Age of Sigmar, whatever, the biggest recommendation that I can give to you is treat these warband boxes as if they were starter sets for your faction. Bear in mind, you might want to add additional things. List building is a very integral part of Warcry, so you might want to bring in additional heroes as allies, big monsters, hulking, like Fongeroid crushers, all sorts of thralls, dogs, whatever. You might want to do that anyway, so take these more as starting sets and starting blocks for the warbands that you're looking to create. There is a definite list in terms of how strong warbands are and how self-contained the box is. This list here is kind of a rough gauge of that. At the top, you'll have Cruel Boys, Monster Killers, and Vulcan Flameseekers. These warbands are generally considered to be the most complete self-contained warbands that can work at any level of play, whether you're playing casually or you're playing competitively. Then you have warbands underneath them, like Wildercorp Hunters and Questor Soulsworn. These kinds of warbands can function internally, and you won't feel bad running everything that comes in those boxes. If you wanted to bulk them out with additional options, that you could most definitely do. At the bottom of this list, I've got Claws of Karanak, the Teratic Cohort, and Yildrim Riverblades. The reason why they are there is because despite the models being amazing, and they are, all of the Warcry models are fantastic, you will need to supplement these warbands with other things, because by themselves, they're kind of not just doing it. Either by their gimmick not working, or by the models themselves being kind of on the weaker side, anything like that. You will need to add additional fighters to these warbands to bring them up to scale, especially if it's you and your buddies, you will pick the Warcry warband. Someone picked Cruel Boys Monster Killers, for example. If you're sitting down there with Claws of Karanak, you're generally going to have not all that good a time. Anything else, though, I would recommend that you guys can go out and buy. Anything at the top of this list will be more self-contained. Anything at the bottom of this list will need additional things added to bring their power level up. And again, it depends on what kind of player you are. If you're looking to be competitive and you are looking to play in events, you're probably going to want to look at the top half of this. That isn't to say that some of these other warbands can't do it. Hunters of Huanchi, for example, are a very good warband. They have very good win rates if we're talking about events and tournaments, but they function in a completely different way from any other Warcry warband, and you will want to bring things in to supplement their numbers and their speed. The next way that you could get into Warcry is through the Warhammer Underworlds boxes. Up until this season of Warhammer Underworlds, every Warhammer Underworlds warband is legal, and they do have rules for Warcry. Their points have recently been updated in the September FAQ, so you really can't go wrong pushing together any one or two of these Warhammer Underworlds warbands to try and make a functioning list. It is worth noting that just like normal warbands, just like any faction in any game that Games Ultra produces, there are some that are better than others. There are some that are more commonly used than others. So my recommendations here are really going to reflect that. Each of these boxes come to around about £61.50. So that's very similar to the Warcry Starter Set. You don't get any of the rules, but like I said, those rules are freely available over on Warcry. You don't get any terrain, you don't get any dice, but those are, again, kind of easy to come by. Out of all 4 Warhammer Underworlds boxes that you can buy at the moment, the ones that I would recommend you to take a look at are Despoilers and Demons and Brutes and Bandits. The reason for that is because the 4 Underworlds warbands are contained in both of those boxes. They contain elements that, one, are generally seen as pretty decent or pretty interesting for people to use. They might have different tricks and different abilities than the main factions that you're looking at. And 2, they are easily expanded out. If you wanted to buy additional boxes and additional miniatures, you can use these warbands to kind of form a basis for that. If you wanted to build your Warcry warband from any of these boxes, the idea is that they're all in the same Grand Alliance, so you could use any 2 of the Underworld teams in these boxes to make your Warcry warbands. You'll have a legal team, you'll have a bunch of unique models to paint and to model with, and it's generally not seen as being all that bad an idea. Another option for you are the Age of Sigmar Spearheads. There are a lot of them, and there is one for every single compendium team that is currently in Warcry. Some teams have 2 or more, some teams have just the 1. These are going to set you back around about £87 in today's money, so a little bit more expensive than the other options that we've been looking at, especially when you compare them to just going in there with a Warcry-specific bespoke product. This will cost you around twice that. But what do you get? You get way more models. Let's put it that way. It is worth mentioning that not everything in these Spearhead boxes you're able to use in Warcry. Bearing that in mind, the ones that I would recommend that you guys go out and take a look at are the Ironjaw's Big Mob, Dark Oath Raiders, and the new upcoming Death Rattle Tomb Host. I think these are the best warbands in terms of what they contain, what you can use, and how good the lists are that you can build from them. The Ironjaw Spearhead in particular has everything you need to put forward a fully functioning Ironjaw's warband. It's very, very good, but any of those 3 are the ones I would recommend. You can build 2 different warbands out of Dark Oath. You can build Dark Oath Savages, and you can build the generic Dark Oath faction, so you get 2 warbands in one for that. There are other warbands that are pretty decent. The Maggotkin of Nurgle one, for example, you get a whole bunch of Nurgle demons, and you get a whole bunch of Nurgle mortals. You can use both of them. You can make 2 warbands out of that. But yeah, those 3 I think are the best ones, and they give you most bang for your buck. Finally, the last option, if you're not just going for single Age of Sigmar boxes for units, are the Age of Sigmar starter sets. You've got 3 options for this. You've got the Ultimate Starter Set, which comes at $130. You've got the normal starter set, which is the £67.51, and then you've got the introductory set for £42.50. I don't think the introductory set gives you enough variety and enough scope of models to have a decent game, so I wouldn't go for that. Similarly, I wouldn't go for the Ultimate Starter Set because the additional models that you get in there aren't really going to give you any better of an experience, and some of them you're unlikely to use in your warbands going forward. So the one that I would recommend is the normal, regular Age of Sigmar Starter Set. The middle-of-the-road version, you get on the Skaven side, you get a bunch of Clan Rats, you get a bunch of Rat Ogres, and you get a Grey Seer, which all comes together to make a pretty decent and pretty effective warband. You've got your big guys, you got your little guys, you got your wizard leading them. It's fluffy. You get to do a little bit of everything, a little bit of shooting, a little bit of punching, and I think it's nice as a kind of starter contained set. Similarly, for the Stormcast Eternal side, you get a bunch of warriors, your wizard captain, and your prosecutors. So you get a little bit of speed, some bulk, and 2 very different warbands against each other that have very different play styles. And then you can kind of choose which direction you want to go. Out of all of the options that we've discussed here, If you were going in with a friend with the idea that you two wanted to play Warcry, I would say the Age of Sigmar starter set is probably the best way to go. The board that you get is the same size as your standard Warcry board. You get some rulers, you get some dice in there. Your rules are free online. The only thing you need after that is terrain, and then you can expand out your collections with additional things as you want. If you're going in by yourself and you wanted to start with Skaven specifically, I would say this is a very good box to buy because you get your Rat Ogres and then you get a bunch of basic dudes, and then you can sell off the rest of them on eBay. So the last thing that I want to talk about when getting into the game specifically is terrain. Games Workshop did do a couple of terrain Warcry specific products. They did the Scales of Talaxis box set and the Gnarloak Warcamp box set. Those are both on limited release and they don't sell them anymore. They do sell all of the individual pieces from those sets, but they're very expensive and you'll generally need a lot of them. Warcry is one of those games where you want as much terrain as you can reasonably pack on the board, and it's going to end up being very expensive for you to do that. So this is where I'm basically going to say I don't think that Games Workshop can really do it for you. I would go third party for your terrain. You can get very good MDF terrain. You can get very good 3D printed terrain, stuff from Etsy, all that kind of thing. That's personally what I would go for, unless you can find on eBay or elsewhere something like the Gnarloak Warcamp or the Scales of Talaxis set, or even those older Warcry sets. Red Harvest, for example, had excellent terrain in there. If you can find that at a reasonable price, that might be a way that you want to go. So, taking all of this together, what would I do if I was getting into the game? Like I said, the most important thing when you're first starting out in Warcry isn't the faction that you're going to play. It's the models themselves. If you're vibing with the models, if you love the sculpts, if you like the background and the flavor of your warband, that's really what you want when you start, because if you like that and you're vibing with that, you're going to have a better time overall. Then you can think about, okay, well, what do I want to add to my warband to make it better, or to make it more competitive, or to make it shoot? You can think about that later, but that's really what you want to do as the starting point into the game. In terms of ways in to do that, I think one of the Warcry bespoke boxes, especially from the upper section of that list, is a very good way to do it. Any of those spearheads that I mentioned is also very good. If I were to do it personally, what I would probably do is go for one of those Warhammer Underworlds boxes. It comes in at a similar price point to all of these other options that we've been talking about, and it gives you a whole bunch of different options between those four teams to kind of mix and match your models and to get a whole bunch of different playstyles out of them. I think that'll give you the most interesting games, and yeah, that's where I would start, and then you can grow out your collections from there.